Hi! Previously on this channel, I covered a bunch of single-player mods for Quake 3, mostly because I found them interesting and was somewhat disappointed by their lack of coverage here on YouTube. This is a follow-up video for some of the mods that I missed. Before I begin, there is something I do want to quickly address. I got a few comments in the last video that told me about games like Return to Castle Wolfenstein, Star Trek Voyager Elite Force, and basically a bunch of games made with id Tech 3. Now I understand why these games are brought up, but these aren't Quake, or obscure early 2000s mods. Point being, they don't fit the theme of this series. With that being said, let's get started. The first mod we'll be looking at is called Hunt and was created by a Jay Hoffman back in 2002. This is mostly a gameplay mod that changes the behavior of things like weapons and items, but what we're interested in are its two co-op modes, Save the Universe and Escape from Hell. Let's start with Save the Universe. In this mode, you have to collect a certain amount of artifacts in order to win. It's pretty much the Quake 3 version of the treasure hunting levels from Sonic Adventure, complete with a beeping radar on your HUD. What's also cool is that you can play this on any of Quake 3's maps, and even custom maps, meaning you can play this mode on all your favorite maps, like The Longest Yard, Campgrounds, The Edge of Forever from the previous video, and most importantly, Chronic, a map made to promote the then upcoming Eminem album, the Marshall Mathers LP, complete with player models of Eminem and Dr. Dre. What? This is a real thing. I know this is very out of nowhere, but when else am I gonna be able to bring this up? The other mode, Escape from Hell, has you traversing through a randomly generated hallway in order to reach the end, or to see how far you can get. Personally, I find it a lot less interesting compared to Save the Universe, especially since you can only choose 2 maps. The 3 enemy types you'll encounter include Predators, weak melee-only enemies and are represented by your old pal Klesk. Guards are represented with Tank Jr. and are tanky stationary enemies that rapidly shoot fireballs at you. Depending on what map you picked, they can be annoying to deal with since sometimes they can spawn in places where they can easily blindside you. And finally, there's Titans, represented with Uriel, giant melee-only enemies that deal around 100 damage and take a lot of hits to go down, as you would expect. Then there's the weapon changes I mentioned earlier, and I'm gonna be honest, a lot of these are not good. To start, the Gauntlet now makes you move faster and behaves more like Doom's Chainsaw, locking you onto an enemy and dealing constant damage. This sounds good in theory, but in practice is very ineffective. See, what made Doom's Chainsaw work was that it would often force enemies into a pain state, effectively stun locking them, making it good against lower tier enemies. Here, however, enemies don't have pain states, so they'll still be able to attack you while you essentially tickle them to death. Next is the Machine Gun, which is now a chain gun, which you think would be awesome, but wait until you see how it functions. I'm not pressing any movement keys, by the way. Yeah, so this thing now has an almost comical amount of kickback to it, making it very impractical most of the time. The shotgun now has some slight screen recoil along with some kickback. The grenade launcher does this. Additionally, the grenades seem to have a longer detonation time along with some kickback. The rocket launcher is the same with the addition of some kickback, and are you beginning to see a pattern yet? The lightning gun does whatever this is and also seems to damage enemies over time. The plasma gun is pretty much unchanged, along with it and the lightning gun being the only 2 weapons without kickback. The rail gun has the most amount of kickback out of all the weapons to the point where you can actually just jump with it. The BFG now shoots this giant green lens flare that has a big explosion, although it doesn't do that cool laser thing like in Quake 2. And finally, we have the grappling hook, which was an unused weapon in the original game, although it works a bit differently here, with it now being bound to its own button, rather than having to awkwardly switch to it like a weapon such as in Quake Live. So yeah, overall the weapon changes are a very mixed bag. Another thing I should mention is that Save the Universe's default settings make the enemies pretty tanky, making them take multiple rockets to go down. To change this, you have to go into the advanced setting and turn the Monster Constitution level down to like 20 or 15. This will make it so that enemies will more reliably go down with rockets than the shotgun. But overall, this mod is pretty fun, even with its weird weapon changes. The next mod we have is called Horde and was created by KanerZ45, also known as Cat's Overdrive. This mod is pretty recent, being uploaded in November of 2024, around the time my first video went up. This mod is pretty similar to the survival map from Entity Plus, only a lot more fleshed out. Like in Hunt, you can only play this using either base game maps or custom maps, and you'll also have to spawn in the enemies manually, likely due to this just being a reworked team deathmatch. The goal is to simply get a high score, since you don't have limited lives in this, although dying will reset your score. There's also a leveling system where after enough points you'll gain a level. Each level will increase the power of some of your weapons, as well as your max health and armor. The only thing I don't like about the leveling system is that once you reach level 3, your health will start slowly depleting, which also ties into how getting health back works. The only way to gain back health is through gauntlet kills, but the amount you get back seems to be based on a timer, so the longer you go without killing an enemy, the more health you'll get back. However, I feel this kind of contradicts the health depleting mechanic, since it feels like your health depletes faster than the time it takes to get it back. This is mostly a minor issue, since besides that I actually like almost everything else about this mod, such as the new models for the weapons and enemies, and even that explosion effect for whenever something dies. Makes me wish that there was a custom map with the same art style to go with it. But that's pretty much it for Horde. While there's not much to talk about, I can easily see this being expanded upon into something more. Now before we move on to the last mod, there are a couple honorable mentions I want to briefly go over first. Quake 3 Sandbox is pretty much just Quake 3, but Gary's mod. And it's actually quite impressive. I mean, it has everything from the fizz gun, the gravity gun, the tool gun, and the gauntlet is like a stand-in for the use key, and even faithful recreations of both construct and flatgrass. And much to my surprise, functional vehicles that even bots can ride in, although the physics on these cars are truly something. Oh, and there's also a next bot, because of course there is. The only strange thing is that since props aren't an inherent thing in the Quake 3 engine, you're instead given Minecraft blocks to build with. Like, look, I made a house, and also a Mario. Additionally, you can also spawn in Minecraft bots for some reason. Last thing worth mentioning with this mod is that it wasn't really built with Quake 3, but rather a fork of it called Open Arena, which I can only describe as royalty-free Quake 3. Like seriously, some of these guys are the most stock-looking characters I've ever seen. So overall, Quake 3 Sandbox is more of an interesting curiosity than anything, but I'd still recommend checking it out if you're interested. Lastly, for the honorable mentions, we have Hunter's Moon. Again. Which is a mod I very briefly showed off in a montage in the last video. One of the reasons I didn't go in depth with it is because it's still in development. Well, that and also because the last video was kinda long, and I'd rather want to do a proper review of it once it's done. Anyways, this mod is probably one of the best conversions of Quake 3's gameplay into a single-player setting, since it plays a lot like the newer Doom games, with the levels mostly just being these big arenas where you fight enemies, occasionally broken up by hallways and backtracking. One of the things I do like about this mod is how it makes use of some of Quake 3's pre-existing mechanics, like the 2 medals you can earn in-game now have a purpose. Getting 50 excellent medals will give you a one-time use revive, and getting 30 impressive medals will give you an item that lets you summon an orbital strike. What I also like is how this mod lets you use some of the more underrated Quake weapons, like Quake Live's heavy machine gun, Team Arena's weird rendition of the nail gun, and even the dark matter gun from Quake 4. Lastly, the character you play as actually matters somewhat, since they all have a unique ability and even different movement speeds, which seems to be based on that unused weight class mechanic from the IHV prototype, complete with using the same icons as well. Overall though, this is still a really fun mod that I'd highly recommend checking out. The last mod we'll be looking at is Sidrial, a total conversion released by Fountainhead Entertainment back in 2002. This mod is unfortunately unfinished and only has one level. Upon starting a new game, we get an idea of what the story is from this mission briefing. We play as a Sidrilian rebel who has to break into a factory and steal some data from the overlords. The first thing you'll notice upon loading into the game is that this HUD is a bit much, and there's no option for a minimal HUD either. The second thing is that there's no enemies in this, aside from this grenade turret at the start. That's because this mod is a lot more puzzle focused. But if that's the case, then why are there still health and weapon pickups? Well, that's because there's still environmental hazards, like toxic waste, these crushers, and that's kind of it. Early on, you find this upgrade chip for the blaster weapon that turns it into a jetpack with the secondary fire. One thing that did surprise me about this mod is that saving actually works, and will even automatically load it once you die. I only say this because the last mod we looked at that had a save system was Dark Conjunction, and it wasn't really good in that game. Once you steal the data sphere, you'll have to turn off some fans blocking the exit. Then, a cutscene plays showing our guy escaping before finding a vehicle, and then it's over. We can get a better idea of what this mod was going to be like, since if you go to the Cinematics tab, you can actually find what is essentially a trailer for the game.
In a world where tyranny reigns, but hopes of rebellion survive annihilation, heroes will emerge out of the ruins, and friendships will be forged for the ultimate battle against the brutal overlords.
Oh yeah, this all looks really good. An overarching storyline complete with side characters and, well, actual enemies. I could easily have seen this being one of those underrated gems of a mod that would be fondly remembered, but alas, it seems that it ceased development after this. Or did it? You see, when looking for mods to review, I would often frequent ModDB, as you do. I mean, that is where I found the Dark Conjunction, since it was actually uploaded there by the Ace team themselves. Fountainhead Entertainment has a ModDB account, but strangely, Sidrial is not listed there, despite me being able to find it elsewhere. However, they do have one game listed on there called Game Over in Machinimation, which was released in 2004. And upon booting it up, something immediately stood out to me, and no, it's not that it's sponsored by Gamefly. It's that this game is Sidrial. It's the same game. Same level, same weapons, and if it weren't for that little player model on the bottom left of the HUD, you wouldn't be able to tell that I was showing you a different game. Another thing is that this appears to have been a tie-in game for a show also called Game Over, which was released around the same time.
Did you ever wonder what happens after the game ends?
Shoot, I'm late for dinner.
Welcome to the other side.
It had 1 season, 6 episodes, and a 5.8 on IMDb, so overall a very average but forgettable show. So forgettable in fact that the whole series is on YouTube and wasn't taken down. Link in description. I think this would be a kids show since the visuals are like this weird mix of Jimmy Neutron and Food Fight, but no. The writing is more akin to something like early Family Guy with an emphasis on a lot of edgier adult jokes. Although part of me might only think that because the dad character Ripley is voiced by Patrick Warburton.
Are you okay? Oh yeah, it's just nice to be out of the house.
Going back to the game, it appears to have been developed using a later version of Sidrial, since it has a lot of gameplay changes, such as you move slower, the environmental hazards hurt less, and there's even the option to toggle third person. But most importantly, there's actual enemies who are very clearly just the Sidrial guy but with a different texture. The other difference is the story, since you now play as the mom character Raquel, who is described as a Lara Croft ripoff. And instead of retrieving data, you now have to find an alien monkey, which is a reoccurring plot point in the show. You can also use more of Sidrial's weapons, such as the Grenner, which is a grenade launcher, the Hallenser is a rapid-fire disc launcher, and the Sonic Disruptor is the game's railgun. There's also now ladders in places where you'd have to use the jetpack upgrade, pretty much making it redundant. I wasn't able to find any other information regarding Sidrial, although Fountainhead Entertainment did go on to develop the first Doom RPG, which I thought was interesting. Although it's weird to think that part of this game's legacy is that it was repurposed into a tie-in game for an obscure early 2000s animated sitcom. And that's it. Yeah, there wasn't as much to talk about compared to last time. This will probably be the last Quake-related video for a while, since there are some other relatively obscure games that I want to cover. Before I end this off, I do want to thank everyone for the support that the last video got. I wasn't expecting that many people would be interested in such a relatively niche topic, so thank you. Okay, but seriously though, like, does anybody actually remember this show?